A boy says to a wealthy woman, "I know you, your picture is in my mom's wallet." She froze when she learned what it meant. The millionaire led a life of luxury, elegance, and solitude, her world filled with the finest things money could buy. Every detail of her life was carefully curated, from her mansion's marble floors to the priceless art hanging on her walls. Yet, amid all this abundance, there was an undeniable emptiness. Her riches could not fill the void within her heart, a space left vacant by the absence of meaningful human connections. She moved through life with a sense of detachment, untouched by the emotions that seemed to swirl around her. Her daily walks through the park were the only moments she allowed herself to step out of her carefully controlled environment. It was a quiet sanctuary, a place where the rustle of leaves and distant chatter of strangers provided a brief respite from her isolated existence. The air was fresh, the trees offered shade, and for a little while, she could pretend to be a part of the world around her. Little did she know, this ordinary day would mark the beginning of a journey that would change everything she thought she knew. As she strolled down the familiar path, lost in thought, a child's voice broke through her reverie. She glanced down to see a small boy, no older than 6, standing in front of her with a curious look on his face. His wide, innocent eyes locked onto hers as he spoke words that would send a shiver down her spine. "I know you," he said with a quiet certainty. "Your picture is in my mom's wallet." The statement hung in the air, strange and unsettling, breaking through the rhythm of her day like a thunderclap. The millionaire's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the boy, her mind racing to make sense of his words. How could this be possible? She had no family, no ties to anyone who would carry her picture, especially not a stranger. Yet, there was something in the boy's innocent confidence that unsettled her. She felt a flicker of recognition deep within, though she couldn't place it. Her carefully constructed life suddenly felt fragile, as if a single thread could unravel it all. Kneeling down to the boy's level, she searched his face for answers, though she knew he wouldn't be able to provide them. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" she asked gently, her voice betraying a hint of the confusion she felt. The boy nodded, unshaken in his conviction, as if what he said was the most natural thing in the world. "Yes, I've seen it many times," he added, before flashing her a bright smile and skipping off towards the playground, leaving her standing there, rooted to the spot. As the boy disappeared into the crowd, the millionaire's mind was awash with questions. Who was this child? And more importantly, who was his mother? Her life had been so carefully guarded, so meticulously planned, that the idea of someone knowing her in such a personal way felt like an intrusion. She was used to controlling every aspect of her existence, and now, in a single moment, that control had been shaken. Her heart pounded as the boy's words echoed in her ears. For the rest of her walk, she couldn't shake the feeling that something from her past was coming back to haunt her. The park, once a place of peace and solitude, now felt charged with the weight of this encounter. She could no longer enjoy the simple beauty of the trees or the sound of birds in the distance. Every step felt heavy, burdened by the questions that now consumed her thoughts. What was this boy's mother hiding? And why did she carry a photo of her? By the time she returned to her mansion, the world she had carefully built for herself felt smaller, more confined. She had spent years crafting a life of luxury and success, but now, standing in the opulence of her home, all she could think about was that little boy's innocent face. His words had ignited a fire within her, a curiosity she couldn't extinguish. She had tried so hard to bury the past, to move forward without looking back, but now it seemed the past was determined to catch up with her. That night, as she lay in her grand, empty bed, sleep would not come. The stillness of the room, once a source of comfort, now felt suffocating. Her mind kept drifting back to the child's words, and with them came memories she had long pushed aside. Faces from her past, blurred by time, began to resurface. She couldn't help but wonder if this encounter was more than a coincidence. What if there was something, or someone, she had overlooked? The thought was both terrifying and intriguing. In the quiet of the night, she realized she had no choice but to seek answers. The millionaire, always so composed, so sure of herself, now felt a growing sense of vulnerability. Something had shifted within her, and there was no turning back. The mystery of the boy, his mother, and the photograph would not let her rest until she uncovered the truth. And though she didn't yet know where this path would lead, one thing was certain: her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. After her encounter with the boy, the millionaire found herself consumed by thoughts she couldn't shake. She had always been someone who lived with certainty, her life moving forward with careful precision. But now, the boy's innocent words had opened a door to a past she had long buried. As she returned to her daily routines, she realized she couldn't escape the lingering questions. Who was the boy's mother, and why did she carry her photo? The doubt began to gnaw at her, pulling her deeper into memories she had tried to forget. Each day, she tried to push the incident from her mind, but it was impossible. As she sat in board meetings or entertained guests at lavish dinners, her thoughts would drift back to the boy's face, to his simple statement that had turned her world upside down. She had always believed her past was behind her, locked away, but now it seemed like it was clawing its way back into her life. The millionaire's calm demeanor began to crack as curiosity took hold. She knew she had to find answers. At night, the quiet solitude of her home became unbearable. Lying in bed, she found herself replaying the encounter over and over, searching for clues in the boy's words. His mother carried her picture. How? Why? The possibility that this could be a case of mistaken identity briefly crossed her mind, but deep down, she knew there was more to it. A vague sense of recognition had stirred when she heard the boy speak, though she couldn't yet understand why. It was as if her past was speaking to her through him. Her curiosity soon became a quiet obsession. She began to recall the faces and names from her past, piecing together the fragments of a life she had left behind. Old friendships, fleeting romances, and people she had once loved but had lost along the way. The millionaire had always prided herself on her ability to move forward, to never dwell on the past. But now, the memories came flooding back, unbidden and relentless. They carried with them a deep sense of longing and, worse yet, regret. Determined to make sense of the boy's words, she started to do something she hadn't done in years. She began to investigate her own past. Late at night, after the world had quieted down, she would sit in her study, sifting through old photos and letters. Each image, each word, was a reminder of the life she had chosen to leave behind. Faces from decades ago stared back at her, some familiar, others faded with time. She felt a pang of loss as she realized how disconnected she had become from the person she once was. The more she dug into her memories, the more she began to question the choices she had made. Had she been too focused on success? Too willing to cut ties with people who had mattered? As the questions mounted, she found herself revisiting places she hadn't thought about in years. Old neighborhoods, familiar streets, each one carried with it the weight of history, of moments both cherished and forgotten. And with every step she took down memory lane, the nagging sense of guilt grew. Her curiosity began to extend beyond just the boy and his mother. She wanted to understand herself, to figure out why she had spent so many years pushing people away. There had been a time when she was surrounded by love, by friendships that felt unbreakable. But somewhere along the line, she had chosen a different path, a path that led to wealth and success but left her utterly alone. The doubt crept in, filling the spaces where certainty once lived, making her question everything she thought she knew. Days turned into weeks, and the questions only grew louder. She could no longer pretend that the encounter with the boy had been a random, inconsequential event. It had awakened something within her, a need for answers that could no longer be ignored. the more she tried to distract herself with work, with the trappings of her privileged life, the more restless she became. The curiosity had taken root deep inside her, and she knew there was no escaping it until she uncovered the truth. In her quest for answers, she began to look for the boy and his mother. Discreetly at first, she asked around the park, hoping someone might recognize the description of the child. It felt strange, almost intrusive, to be investigating a stranger's life, but she couldn't stop herself. Her heart raced each time she thought she had found a lead, only to be disappointed. The mystery continued to elude her, but with every dead end, her determination only grew stronger. The millionaire, once so composed, was now driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. The questions swirling in her mind had begun to shape her every thought, her every move. And though she was afraid of what she might find, she couldn't help but feel a thrill at the possibility of uncovering something that could change her life forever. What started as a moment of innocent confusion had now become a journey into the depths of her own heart, and there was no turning back. After weeks of searching, the millionaire finally stumbled upon a name that triggered something deep within her. It was faint, like a whisper from a distant time, but it was there. The name belonged to a woman she hadn't thought about in years, someone who had once been as close to her as family. They had been inseparable, tied together by a bond that felt unbreakable, but time and circumstances had torn them apart. The discovery shook her, as the pieces of her past began to fall into place. The woman, the boy's mother, was someone she had known well, someone she had once loved deeply. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, crashing against the walls she had built around her heart. Memories she had long suppressed began to surface, of laughter shared, of promises made and broken. This was no ordinary acquaintance from her past, this was someone who had been pivotal in shaping the person she had become. And now, after all these years, their lives had crossed paths once more. In her mind, she replayed the moments that had led to their separation. They had been close, like sisters, bound by trust and affection. But life had taken them in different directions, and slowly, their connection had frayed. There had been misunderstandings, arguments, and eventually, a painful silence. The millionaire had chosen to move forward without looking back, believing that leaving the past behind was the only way to succeed. But now, standing on the brink of this revelation, she realized how wrong she had been. As she delved deeper into her memories, she was overcome with a sense of guilt. She had left this woman behind, cutting ties when things became difficult, prioritizing her own ambitions over their relationship. In the years since, she had never stopped to consider the impact of her actions. But now, with the boy's words echoing in her mind, she understood the weight of the choices she had made. Her success had come at a cost, one she was only now beginning to grasp. Determined to learn more, she began to track down her old friend. It wasn't easy. The years had passed, and the woman had moved on, creating a life of her own, far removed from the circles the millionaire now moved in. But the more she searched, the more determined she became. She had to understand what had happened during the years they had been apart. She needed to confront the ghosts of her past and, perhaps, find a way to make amends for the pain she had caused. When she finally found her, it wasn't the reunion she had imagined. The woman was no longer the carefree spirit the millionaire remembered. Time had changed her, leaving traces of hardship and struggle in the lines of her face. And yet, there was a resilience there, a strength that hadn't existed before. Seeing her again after all these years stirred a mix of emotions within the millionaire: joy, regret, and an overwhelming sense of loss. She had missed so much, and now, she wasn't sure if she could ever bridge the gap between them. The conversation was brief, awkward at first, as they navigated the years of silence that lay between them. The millionaire was careful not to reveal too much, not yet. She wasn't ready to confront the full truth, the depth of what had been lost. But in the woman's eyes, she could see the same questions, the same hesitations. It was clear that the past still lingered between them, a shadow that neither could escape. And though they exchanged polite words, there was an unspoken understanding that something deeper was at play. As the millionaire walked away from the encounter, her heart felt heavier than ever. The reunion, while brief, had stirred something inside her, a realization that she had been running from her past for far too long. She couldn't change the decisions she had made, but perhaps there was still time to mend the broken pieces. The weight of her guilt pressed down on her as she returned to her mansion, her mind racing with possibilities. How could she repair what had been damaged? That night, as she sat alone, the full impact of the day's events settled over her like a thick fog. The woman, her once dear friend, had been a central figure in her life, someone she had trusted implicitly. And yet, she had let that relationship slip away, choosing ambition over love, over loyalty. The thought was almost unbearable. But now, with the knowledge that this woman had a child, the boy who had approached her in the park, the stakes had become even higher. The millionaire knew that this revelation was only the beginning. There was more to the story, a deeper truth waiting to be uncovered. She could feel it, lurking just beyond her reach. And though fear gripped her, she also felt a strange sense of hope. Perhaps this encounter was a second chance, a chance to right the wrongs of her past and reconnect with the people she had left behind. But to do so, she would need to confront the secrets she had kept buried for so long. As the days passed, the weight of her past began to bear down on the millionaire with increasing intensity. The memories she had unearthed left her feeling raw and exposed, as if she had opened a door that could never be closed. She had spent years building a life of success and wealth, believing that these accomplishments would shield her from the pain of old wounds. But now, she realized that no amount of money could erase the choices she had made or the people she had left behind. Nostalgia, once a distant echo, now overwhelmed her. She found herself revisiting moments from her youth, the time she had spent with her old friend, the laughter, the closeness they had shared. But these memories were tinged with regret. She had walked away from that bond, convinced that her ambitions were more important, that she needed to move forward at any cost. Now, as she looked around at her lavish surroundings, the realization hit her like a cold wave: her success had come with a steep price. Each day, she felt the emptiness of her life more acutely. The grand halls of her mansion, once symbols of her triumph, now seemed hollow. The luxury that had once brought her comfort now felt suffocating, a reminder of everything she had lost. She had sacrificed love, friendship, and family in pursuit of her career, and now, standing at the pinnacle of wealth, she was alone. The life she had built was one of material success, but emotionally, she had nothing to show for it. The guilt that had begun to surface after her encounter with the boy now settled into a permanent presence. It gnawed at her, making her question every decision she had made. What had it all been for? The long hours, the deals, the drive to be the best, none of it seemed to matter anymore. The faces of the people she had left behind haunted her thoughts. There had been times when she could have reached out, when she could have held on to the relationships that mattered, but instead, she had chosen to walk away. Her nights were the worst. In the stillness of her grand, empty bedroom, she lay awake, replaying the choices of her past. She thought about the woman she had once considered family, the bond they had shared, and how easily she had let it slip through her fingers. She remembered the arguments, the harsh words spoken in moments of anger, and the final silence that had followed. At the time, she had convinced herself that it was for the best, that she needed to move on. But now, she saw it for what it truly was, a mistake. As she grappled with these emotions, the realization of her isolation became even more pronounced. She had always believed that success would bring her happiness, that achieving her goals would fill the void inside her. But now, she could see the truth. Her success had come at the expense of her happiness. She had pushed away the people who cared about her, and in doing so, had isolated herself in a gilded cage. The realization was painful, but it was also necessary. Amidst this emotional turmoil, the millionaire found herself reflecting on the nature of relationships. She had always prided herself on being independent, on not needing anyone. But now, she understood that independence was not the same as isolation. She had chosen to walk a path of solitude, but it had left her empty and unfulfilled. The connections she had once cherished, the people who had brought joy and meaning into her life, were gone. And for the first time in years, she felt the full weight of that loss. Her thoughts kept returning to the boy and his mother, the connection they shared, and the life she had missed out on. The idea that this woman, once so dear to her, had a child who had unknowingly stumbled into her life, filled her with a mix of emotions. There was sadness for the years they had lost, but also a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this was her chance to make things right. The thought of reconciliation, of reconnecting with the people she had pushed away, began to take root in her heart. However, the path to forgiveness was not an easy one. The millionaire knew that healing the wounds of the past would require more than just words. It would take time, effort, and a willingness to confront the pain she had caused. But for the first time, she felt ready to take that step. The luxury that had once defined her now felt meaningless without the human connections she had once held dear. She knew she had to change, to open herself up to the possibility of love, of family, of belonging. With this new realization, the millionaire found herself at a crossroads. She could continue down the path she had always walked, focusing on her success and ignoring the emptiness inside her, or she could turn back and try to rebuild the relationships she had lost. It was a difficult choice, but deep down, she knew what she had to do. The weight of the past was heavy, but it was also a reminder of what truly mattered. And now, with the boy's innocent words still echoing in her mind, she knew that she had to find a way to move forward. The deeper the millionaire dug into her past, the more unsettling the truth became. Her investigation led her to a discovery she never imagined. The boy wasn't just the son of her old friend, he was her grandson. The revelation hit her with the force of a tidal wave, pulling her into a storm of emotions. The child, who had unknowingly disrupted her life with a simple statement, was a living link to a family she had forgotten existed. She had given up her own daughter years ago, a decision that had remained buried in the recesses of her mind. Now, it all came rushing back. Years ago, when she was young and frightened, she had made a decision that she believed was for the best. Pregnant and alone, she had given her daughter up for adoption, convinced that it was the only way forward. She had shut the door on that part of her life, focusing on her career and her ambitions. But now, the boy in the park had reopened that door, and with it came the painful memories of a choice she had never truly confronted. The child she had given away had grown up, and now, that child had a child of her own. The millionaire was overwhelmed with guilt and shame. How had she managed to erase such a significant part of her life? She had always prided herself on being in control, on making the hard decisions, but now it was clear that she had simply run away. The child she had abandoned had found her way back into her life through her own son, and the weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. She felt as though she had been living in a dream, one that was now shattered by the truth. She spent days in a fog of disbelief, unable to process the magnitude of what she had uncovered. The life she had built, the wealth, the success, it all seemed meaningless in the face of this revelation. How could she have forgotten her own child? How could she have moved on as if nothing had happened? The decisions she had made all those years ago seemed unforgivable now. Her daughter, the one she had given away, had lived a life without her, and she had no idea what kind of life that had been. Desperate to understand more, she dove deeper into the investigation. She learned that her daughter had grown up in a loving home, but had struggled with the knowledge of her adoption. There had been questions, doubts, and a sense of abandonment that had followed her throughout her life. The millionaire's heart broke as she uncovered these details. She had never wanted to hurt her child, but by walking away, she had caused a pain that reverberated through generations. And now, the boy, her grandson, was a living reminder of that pain. The conflict that now raged inside her was unbearable. Part of her wanted to reach out, to fix the damage she had caused, but another part of her was terrified of what she might find. How could she possibly make amends for something so profound? Her daughter had built a life without her, and her grandson, the boy who had unknowingly set all of this in motion, had no idea who she truly was. The millionaire felt trapped, paralyzed by the enormity of the situation. The life she had lived for so long now seemed like a lie. In the quiet moments, the truth gnawed at her. She could see no way forward that didn't involve confronting the pain of her past, but the thought of facing her daughter was almost too much to bear. What could she possibly say to her? How could she explain the decision she had made all those years ago? She feared that any attempt to reconnect would only bring more pain, that her presence in their lives would be a reminder of the abandonment they had suffered. And yet, she couldn't stay away. She had to know more. As the days passed, the need to confront the truth grew stronger. The millionaire had always been a woman of action, someone who faced challenges head-on. But this was different. This was personal, and the stakes were higher than anything she had ever encountered in her business dealings. She could negotiate deals worth millions, but how could she possibly negotiate forgiveness? The thought of facing her daughter, of seeing the pain she had caused, filled her with a fear she had never known before. Finally, she made the decision to reach out. It wasn't a choice she made lightly, and it wasn't without fear. But she knew that she couldn't live in the shadows any longer. The secret she had kept buried for so long had come to light, and there was no putting it back. She wrote a letter, pouring out her heart, explaining the choices she had made and the regrets that had haunted her. It was a first step, a way of opening the door to a conversation she knew would be difficult, but necessary. As she sent the letter, her hands trembled. She had no idea how her daughter would respond, or if she would respond at all. The waiting was excruciating, but for the first time in years, the millionaire felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out now, and while she didn't know what would come next, she knew that she had taken the first step. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of a journey she knew she had to take. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was finally ready to face it. The millionaire stood at the doorstep, her heart pounding as she prepared to face the most difficult moment of her life. She had waited for days, uncertain whether her daughter would respond to the letter she had sent. And then, the reply had come, brief, but clear. Her daughter was willing to meet, though the tone was guarded, understandably so. Now, as she stood before the door, the weight of everything she had hidden for years pressed down on her. She had faced boardrooms, hostile negotiations, and business adversaries, but nothing compared to this. As the door slowly opened, time seemed to stretch. There she was, her daughter, standing just a few feet away, a mixture of emotions playing across her face. The millionaire barely recognized the woman before her. Gone was the child she had given up, in her place was a grown woman with a life of her own, a mother to a child the millionaire had met in a park by pure chance. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, years of distance and pain standing like a wall. For a moment, neither of them knew what to say. Her daughter was the first to speak, her voice quiet but steady. Why now? It was a simple question, but the weight of it almost crushed the millionaire. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind, prepared 1,000 explanations, but now, standing in front of the person she had abandoned, all of those words fell away. I was scared, she finally said, her voice trembling. I thought I was doing what was best. I didn't know how to be a mother, so I gave you away. But I was wrong. I see that now. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence that followed her words heavy with decades of unresolved feelings. Her daughter's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, the millionaire feared that she would walk away, that this meeting would end before it even began. But then, through the tears, her daughter spoke again. Do you know how much it hurt? Growing up without knowing who you were, wondering why you didn't want me? The millionaire's heart shattered at those words. The truth, which she had buried for so long, was finally laid bare. I'm so sorry, the millionaire whispered, her voice breaking. I've regretted it every day of my life. I didn't know how to face it, so I ran. I thought if I just focused on building my life, I could forget. But I never did. The tears she had held back for years finally spilled over, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. For the first time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, to feel the full weight of her past mistakes. Her daughter stood silently, watching the person who had been a stranger to her for so long reveal the truth. The tension began to dissolve as both women let their guard down. Her daughter stepped forward, her expression softening as the anger gave way to something else, pain, yes, but also understanding. I didn't know if I wanted to meet you, her daughter admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I thought about it for years. But when my son told me about the woman in the park, I knew it was you. I needed to know why you left. I needed to hear it from you." The millionaire nodded, realizing that this moment, painful as it was a chance for both of them to heal. Tears flowed freely now, and for the first time, they talked, not just as strangers, but as mother and daughter. The millionaire spoke of the fear that had driven her decisions, the mistakes she had made, and the regret that had followed her all these years. Her daughter listened, and in turn, she shared the pain of growing up without a mother, of searching for answers that never came. It was a raw, emotional exchange, filled with anger, sadness, and ultimately, a desire to understand one another. As they talked, something shifted. The pain was still there, but so was the possibility of forgiveness. The millionaire knew that it would take time, that the wounds of the past couldn't be healed in a single conversation. But this was a start, a fragile beginning to something that had been broken for so long. And in the midst of their tears, there was a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, after all these years, they could find a way to move forward, to rebuild the relationship they had lost. The boy, her grandson, appeared in the doorway, unaware of the emotional storm that had taken place inside. He looked at the two women, sensing the tension, but then smiled, his innocent eyes bridging the gap between past and present. It was in that moment that the millionaire realized the enormity of what had been revealed. She wasn't just reconnecting with her daughter, she was gaining a family she never knew she had. And in that small boy's smile, she saw the possibility of redemption. As they said their goodbyes, the millionaire knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey. There were still so many questions, so much healing that needed to happen. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Hope that perhaps she could repair what had been broken, that she could find her place in this family she had lost. And though the road ahead would be difficult, she was ready to walk it, no matter how long it took. In the weeks following their emotional confrontation, the millionaire and her daughter worked to rebuild the fragile bridge between them. It was a slow process, filled with moments of tension and vulnerability. Trust, long broken, couldn't be restored overnight. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a mutual desire to heal. They both understood that the past could not be undone, but they could choose how to shape the future. And so, step by step, they began to open up to one another, sharing stories, fears, and hopes that had been kept hidden for years. The millionaire, who had spent so much of her life hiding behind wealth and success, found herself slowly lowering her defenses. With her daughter and grandson, she didn't need to project the image of the powerful woman who had everything. Instead, she could be herself, flawed, regretful, but also open to change. It was a new experience for her, one that was both liberating and frightening. But as she allowed herself to be vulnerable, she found a sense of connection that had been missing from her life for so long. Her daughter, too, had her own journey of healing. For years, she had lived with the pain of abandonment, unsure if she would ever get answers. Now, with those answers in hand, she faced the difficult task of reconciling the past with the present. The anger she had once carried began to soften, replaced by a cautious willingness to understand her mother's choices. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but as they spent time together, a new kind of bond began to form, one based not on the past, but on the possibility of a future. Their relationship grew through small, meaningful gestures. The millionaire visited her daughter's home often, learning about her life and getting to know her grandson. The boy, with his boundless energy and innocent curiosity, became a central figure in their reconciliation. His laughter filled the spaces that had once been silent, his joy infectious. Watching him play, the millionaire often found herself marveling at the second chance life had given her. She hadn't been there for her daughter's childhood, but now she had the opportunity to be present for her grandsons. The process of reconciliation wasn't without its challenges. Old wounds would sometimes resurface, bringing moments of tension and discomfort. There were times when her daughter would retreat, the pain of the past too fresh to ignore. But rather than running from these moments, the millionaire faced them head-on. She listened, apologized, and allowed space for the healing to continue at its own pace. In these difficult conversations, both women learned to be patient with one another, recognizing that healing was a process, not an event. The passage of time brought with it a deeper sense of understanding. The millionaire began to see her daughter not just as a reminder of her past mistakes, but as a strong, independent woman who had built a life of her own. In turn, her daughter began to see her mother not as the person who had abandoned her, but as someone who had made difficult choices out of fear and uncertainty. This shift in perspective allowed them both to move beyond the pain and focus on the love that had always been there, buried beneath years of separation. As they spent more time together, the walls between them continued to crumble. The millionaire, who had once lived in a world of isolation, now found herself surrounded by a family she hadn't even known existed. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of awkwardness, but there was also warmth, a warmth she had never felt in her life of luxury. Slowly, her mansion, once a symbol of her loneliness, began to feel like a home, filled with the sounds of laughter and shared stories. The boy, her grandson, played a pivotal role in bringing them all closer together. His innocent questions and boundless affection bridged the gap between past and present, reminding both women of what truly mattered. He didn't care about the mistakes of the past. To him, his grandmother was simply someone who loved him. His presence was a balm for their wounds, and through him, they found a way to connect on a deeper level. The millionaire cherished these moments, knowing that they were a gift she had almost missed out on. With each passing day, the family grew closer, and the millionaire found herself embracing the role of both mother and grandmother. It was a role she had never imagined for herself, but now that it was hers, she approached it with a sense of gratitude and purpose. She took joy in the little things, helping her daughter with daily tasks, taking her grandson to the park, and sharing meals together. These moments, once unimaginable, became the foundation for a new chapter in her life, one that was richer and more fulfilling than any material success. As their bond strengthened, the millionaire realized that true wealth wasn't measured in money or possessions, but in the connections we build with others. She had spent so much of her life chasing success, only to find that what she had truly been searching for was love, acceptance, and family. Now, as she looked around at the people who had become her world, she knew that she had finally found what had been missing all along. The reconciliation wasn't just with her daughter, it was with herself, and with the life she had once feared she could never have. Sitting by the window, the millionaire looked out at the setting sun, her heart filled with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The journey she had been on, one of painful revelations, emotional confrontations, and healing, had transformed her life in ways she could never have anticipated. As she reflected on everything that had happened, one thought stood out above all the rest: the importance of second chances. Life had given her an opportunity to make things right, to reconnect with her family, and for that, she was deeply grateful. For so long, she had believed that her past mistakes were irreversible, that the doors she had closed would remain shut forever. But the boy in the park, her grandson, had changed everything. His innocent words had set off a chain of events that led her back to the people she had left behind. Now, as she looked around her, she realized how fortunate she was to have been given another chance, a chance to rebuild, to love, and to be loved. The life she had once thought was complete had taken on new meaning. The past, with all its pain and regret, would always be a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had learned that while time couldn't be turned back, the future was still hers to shape. Her daughter, once a distant memory, was now a central figure in her life. They had both suffered because of the decisions she had made, but together, they had found a way to heal. The road to reconciliation had been difficult, but it had also been deeply rewarding. Their relationship, fragile at first, had blossomed into something strong and beautiful. Her grandson had become the light of her life, a symbol of the hope and possibility that came with second chances. Through him, she had rediscovered the joy of family, the laughter, the warmth, the unconditional love that she had once thought was lost to her. Each day spent with him was a reminder of the new life she had been given, one filled not with material wealth, but with something far more precious: connection. The boy, who had unknowingly set her on this path, had brought her the greatest gift she could have ever imagined. As she looked toward the future, the millionaire felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer the woman who hid behind success and wealth, isolated from the world. She had opened herself up to love, to family, into the possibility of redemption. The relationships she had once abandoned had been restored, and in the process, she had found herself. The guilt and shame that had weighed so heavily on her were still there, but they had been tempered by forgiveness, both from her daughter and, perhaps most importantly, from herself. The story of her life had taken a turn she never could have predicted. For years, she had believed that happiness was something that could be achieved through success, that by reaching the top, she would find fulfillment. But now, she understood that real happiness came not from what she had, but from who she had in her life. The luxury and opulence that had once defined her existence had faded into the background. In its place were moments of genuine connection, shared meals, quiet conversations, and the laughter of her grandson. She had been given a second chance, and she intended to make the most of it. The path ahead wasn't always going to be easy. There would still be challenges, old wounds that might resurface, and moments of doubt. But she was no longer afraid. She had faced the worst of her fears and had come out the other side with a deeper understanding of herself and what truly mattered. Her life, once so focused on external success, was now centered on the people she loved, and that was the greatest achievement of all. In the quiet of the evening, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on how far she had come. She had spent years believing that her choices had closed the door to happiness, but now she understood that there was always room for redemption. The past would always be there, but it no longer held power over her. She had learned to forgive herself, to embrace the mistakes she had made, and to use them as a foundation for growth. And in doing so, she had discovered the value of second chances, both in life and in love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the millionaire smiled, knowing that her story was far from over. She had been given the gift of a second chance, and with it, a new beginning. The love she now shared with her daughter and grandson filled her days with joy, and for the first time in years, she felt truly fulfilled. The road she had walked had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a place of peace, forgiveness, and family. And that, she knew, was the greatest wealth of all. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to discover even more captivating narratives, be sure to watch the next video that's just appeared on your screen. It's packed with unexpected twists and unforgettable moments. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you can stay updated on the best emotional stories we have in store for you. We'd also love to hear what you thought of this story. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback is always appreciated.